Meet the President by Zadie Smith, published August 5th, 2013. What do you got there, then? The boy didn't hear the question. He stood at the end of a ruined pier, believing himself quite alone. But now he registered the present at his back and turned. What you got there? A very old person, a woman, stood before him gripping the narrow shoulder of a girl child, both of them local, typically stunted, dim. They stared up at him stupidly. The boy turned again to the sea. All week long he had been hoping for a clear day to try out the new technology. Not new to the world, but new to the boy. And now at last here was a break in the rain. Gray sky met gray sea. Not ideal, but sufficient. Ideally, he would be standing in the cairn in Scotland or some other tropical spot, experiencing backlit clarity. Ideally, he would be. Is it one of them? What you see through? A hand, lousy with blue veins, reached out for the light encircling the boy's head, as if it were a substantial thing, to be grasped like the handle of a mug. Oh, look at that, at the green, Aggie. That shows you it's on. The boy was ready to play. He touched the node on his finger to the node at his temple, raising the volume. Course he'd have to be somebody, Ags, 'cause they don't give 'em to nobody. The boy felt the shocking touch of a hand on his own flesh. Are you somebody, then? She had shuffled around until she stood square in front of him, unavoidable. Hair as white as paper, a long, shapeless black dress made of some kind of cloth, and what appeared to be a pair of actual glasses. 49 years old, type O, a likelihood of ovarian cancer, some ancient debt infraction, nothing more. A blank, more or less. Same one for the girl. Never left the country. 85% chance of macular degeneration. An uncle on the database. Long ago located. Eliminated. She would be 9 in 2 days. Melinda Durham and Agatha Hanwell. They shared no more DNA than strangers. Can you see us? The woman let go of her charge and waved her hands wildly. The tips of her fingers barely reached the top of the boy's head. Are we in it? What are we? The boy, unused to proximity, took a single step forward. Farther he could not go. Beyond was the ocean. Above, a mess of weather, clouds closing in on the blue wherever blue tried to assert itself. A dozen or so craft darted up and down, diving low like seabirds after a fish, and no bigger than seabirds skimming the dirty foam, then returning to the heavens, directed by unseen hands. On his first day here the boy had trailed his father on an inspection tour to meet those hands. Intent young men at their monitors over whose shoulders the boy's father leaned, as he sometimes leaned over the boy and ensured he ate breakfast. What do you call one of 'em there? The boy tucked his shirt in all around. AG 12. The old woman snorted as a mark of satisfaction, but did not leave. He tried looking the females directly in their dull brown eyes. It was what his mother would have done, a kindly woman with a great mass of wave-length flame-colored hair, famed for her patience with locals. But his mother was long dead. He had never known her. He was losing what little light the day afforded. He blinked twice, said, hand to hand, then having a change of heart, weaponry. He looked down at his torso, to which he now attached a quantity of guns. You carry on, lad, the old woman said. We won't get in your way. He can see it all, duck, she told the girl, who paid her no mind. Got something in his hands, or he thinks he does. She took a packet of tobacco from a deep pocket in the front of her garment and began to roll a cigarette, using the girl as a shield from the wind. Them clouds, dark as bulls, racing. They always win. To illustrate, she tried turning Aggie's eyes to the sky, lifting the child's chin with a finger, but the girl would only gawk stubbornly at the woman's elbow. They'll dump on us before we even get there. And if you didn't have to, I wouldn't go, Aggie. No chance, not in this. It's for you I do it. I've been wet and wet and wet all my life. And I bet he's looking at blazing suns and people and their what have yous and all togethers. In your course you are, and who'd blame you? She laughed so loud that the boy heard her, and then the child, who did not laugh, whose pale face with its triangle chin and enormous fair-lashed eyes seemed capable only of astonishment, pulled at his leg, forcing him to mute for a moment and listen to her question. Well, I'm Bill Peake, he replied, and felt very silly, like someone in an old movie. Bill Peake! The old woman cried. Oh, we've had Peakes in Anglia for a long time. You'll find a Peake or two or three down in Sutton Hoo. Bill Peake. You from around here, Bill Peake? His grandparents? Very possibly. Local and English. Or his great-grandparents. His hair and eyes and skin and name suggested it. But it was not a topic likely to engage his father, and the boy himself had never felt any need or desire to pursue it. He was simply global, accompanying his father on his inspections, though usually to livelier spots than this. What a Sodom dump it was! Just as everyone had warned him it would be. The only people left in England were the ones who couldn't leave. From around here, are you? Or maybe a Norfolk one? He looks like a Norfolk one, Aggs, wouldn't you say? Bill Peake raised his eyes to the encampment on the hill, pretending to follow with great interest those dazzling circling diving craft, as if he, uniquely, as the child of personnel, had nothing to fear from them. But the woman was occupied with her bag, and the girl only sang Bill Peake, Bill Peake, Bill Peake to herself, and smiled sadly at her own turned-in feet. They were too local even to understand the implied threat. He jumped off the pier into the deserted beach. It was low tide. It seemed you could walk to Holland. He focused upon the thousands of tiny spirals on the sand like miniature turds stretching out to the horizon. Felixstowe, England, a Norman village, later, briefly, a resort, made popular by the German royal family. Much fishing, once upon a time. 100 years earlier, almost the very month, a quaint flood had killed only 48 people. Over the years, the place had been serially flooded, mostly abandoned. Now the sad little town had retreated 3 miles inland and up a hill. Population, 850. The boy blinked twice more. He did not care much for history. He narrowed his attention to a single turd. Arenicola marina, sandworms, lugworms. These were its coiled castings. Castings? But here he found his interest fading once again. He touched his temple and said, Bloodhead Ford. Then, Washington. It was his first time at this level. Another world began to construct itself around Bill Peake, a shining city on a hill. Poor little thing, Melinda Durham said. She sat on the pier, legs dangling, and pulled the girl into her lap. Demented with grief she is. We are going to laying out. Aggie's sister is laid out today. Her last and only relation. Course, the cold truth is, Aggie's sister weren't much better than trash, and laying out's a sight too good for her. She'd be better off laid out on the beach here and left for the gulls. But I ain't going for her. I do it for Aggie. Aggie knows why. Aggie's been a great help to me with one thing and another. While he waited, as incidental music played, the boy idly checked a message from his father. At what time could he be expected back at the encampment? At what time could he be expected? This was a pleasing development, being an inquiry rather than an order. He would be 15 in May, almost a man. A man could let another man know when he could be expected, and let him know in his own sweet time when he had the inclination. He performed some rudimentary stretches and bounced up and down on the balls of his feet. Maud, that was her name, and she was born under the same steeple she's buried in. 12 years old, but so whorish. Melinda covered Aggie's ears, and the girl leaned into the gesture, having mistaken it for affection. So whorish she looked like a crone. If you lived round here, Bill Peake, you'd known Maud. If you would understand me correctly, you would have known Maud right up to the biblical and beyond. Terrible. But Aggie's cut from quite a different side, thank goodness. Aggie was released and patted on her head. And she's no one left. So here I am, Muggins her, taking her to a laying now when I've a million other stones to be lifted off the pile. The boy placed a number of grenades about his person. In each chapter of the Pathways Global Institute, in Paris, New York, Shanghai, Nairobi, Jerusalem, and Tokyo, the boy had enjoyed debating with his friends the question of whether it was better to augment around the facts on the ground, incorporating whatever was at hand, flagging, it was called, the pleasure of the unpredictability, or to choose spots where there were barely any facts to work around. The boy was of the latter sensibility. He wanted to augment in clean, blank spaces where he was free to fully extend unhindered. He looked down the beach as the oil streaks in the sand were overlaid now with a gleaming pavement, lined on either side by the National Guard saluting him. It was 3 miles to the White House. He picked out a large pair of breasts to wear for reasons of his own and a lawn-scaled tail for purposes of strangulation. Oh, no. You wouldn't do me an awful favor and keep an eye on Aggie for just a minute, would you? I've left my rosary. I can't go to no laying out without it. It's more than my soul's worth. Oh, Aggie, how did you ever let me leave without it? She's a good girl, but she's thoughtless sometimes. Her sister were thoughtless too. Bill Peake, will you keep an eye on her, won't you? I won't be a moment. We're shacked up just on that hill by old Martello Tower. 8 minutes I'll be, no more. Would you do that for me, Bill Peake? Bill nodded his head, once rightward, twice leftward. Knives shot out of his wrist and splayed beautifully like fronds of a fern. It was perhaps 20 minutes later, as he approached the pile of rubble, pounded by enemy craft that had once been the monument, that young Bill Peake felt again a presence at his back and turned and found Aggie Hanwell with her fist in her mouth, tears streaming, jaw working up and down in agonized fashion. He couldn't hear her over the explosions. Reluctantly, he paused. She ain't come back. Excuse me? She went, but she ain't come back. Who? He asked, but then he scrolled back until he found it. M. Durham? The girl gave him that same astonished look. My Melly, she said. She promised to take me, but she went and she ain't come back. The boy swiftly located M. Durham, as much as expedience as an act of charity, and experienced the novelty of sharing the information with the girl in the only way she appeared to be able to receive it. She's 2 miles away, he said with his own mouth, heading north. Aggie Hanwell sat down on her bum in the wet sand. She rolled something in her hand. The boy looked at it and learned that it was a periwinkle, a snail of the sea. He recoiled, disliking those things which crawled and slithered upon the earth. But this one proved unbroken, with only its pearlescent nothing inside it. So it was all a lie, Aggie said, throwing her head dramatically to consider the sky. Plus one of them's got my number. I've done nothing wrong, but still Melly's gone and left me, and one of them things been following me since the pier, even before that. If you've done nothing wrong, Bill Peake said, solemnly parroting his father, you've got nothing to worry about. It's a precise business. He had been raised to despair the type of people who spread misinformation about the program. Yet along his new maturity had come fresh insight into the complexities of his father's world. Those who with bad intent on occasion happened to stand beside the good, the innocent, or the underaged? And in those circumstances, couldn't precision be entirely guaranteed? Anyway,